Welcome to Leaders Get Real. Inspirational interviews with today's authentic leaders. I'm your host, Christy Tong, bringing you insightful interviews with best-selling authors and with leaders who are purposeful, passionate, and authentic. Gain compelling insights as they share the challenges and rewards of leading with authenticity and impact. Liz Wiseman is the New York Times bestselling author of Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. Liz has been listed on the Thinkers 50 ranking and named one of the top 10 leadership thinkers in the world. She writes for Harvard Business Review and Fortune. In this episode, we dive back in for part 2 of our conversation. So far, she's talked about her groundbreaking research, which shows how great leaders, or multipliers, bring out the genius in others and get more than twice the results. And she asked some challenging questions, like whether we could be an accidental diminisher with others and not even know it. Ouch, it's opened my eyes. Now, we pick up and get to hear more stories and insights. And by the end of our chat, Liz gives 3 practical challenges that we can walk out with and try immediately. And if you try one, you can end up with a signed copy of Liz's book. So let's jump back in. What I appreciate about your book is that you are just so practical in laying out the 5 disciplines of a multiplier. And so I just want to touch on a few of them because I think getting a feel of what it looks like to do these things as a multiplier really helps. And one of those things, one of those disciplines is to be a liberator. The first practice of Liberator is creating space for people. And you talk about the need for us to, quote, restrain ourselves. And so I'd love to hear any thoughts on that.
Well, we find that the diminisher, so this is really about work environment and the kind of environment or culture that you create around you. And the diminisher tends to be more of a tyrant, and they're not always yelling, chair throwing kind of tyrants, but they create stress around them. And we know what happens to our cognitive abilities when we're experiencing anxiety and stress. You know, literally all of our higher levels of thinking and those parts of our brain shut down. Whereas the multiplier, they, instead of creating stress around them, they create safety. And they create safety for people to do their best thinking and their best work. And part of that safety is space. So they create space for people. So some of it's time-based space. They give people a chance to prep. Now, if you are someone who is good on your feet and you can think in real time, this is a really hard one to do. I've learned to do this is like some of the simplest ways to give people time-based space is to send an agenda out for the meeting in advance. Sometimes I would be leading a meeting. I would be disappointed that people weren't bringing richer ideas or more rigorous debate. Well, yeah, because you're springing it on them. And so I learned, you know what, send out the agenda 24 hours in advance. Or if there's a set of issues you want people to weigh in on, don't just give them a list of topics, give them a set of questions. Hey, here's how I want to engage your brain, because particularly if someone is more introverted or thoughtful or, you want more data, people need time to prep. So that's one of the ways you can give people space is give them time or maybe space to see it differently than you. One way to give people space around you is to think differently, is to label your own opinions. Like, okay, maybe that's a soft opinion. That's a hard opinion. A soft opinion is, you know what? It's just an idea. It's a thought I had. I'm sharing it with you for consideration. A hard opinion is, oh, actually, no, this isn't an opinion. This is almost like a command. I want you to do this and I want you to do it this way.
Yeah, it's an expectation.
It's an expectation. Now, some people operate permanently in that space and need to offer a lot more soft opinions. But a lot of times we have a hard time ferreting out from our leaders, like, does she really want me to do that? Or is that just fodder? And so labeling your opinion soft and hard is helpful. And of course, reserve the hard opinions for the rarities when you really do say, no, this is kind of a command and control moment. I really need you to do it this way. This is what I expect. Or, giving people space to make mistakes. And, I don't know if Silicon Valley is to blame for this, Christy, but we'll blame our valley for this. You know, this mantra of fail fast, fail forward, fail often, fail and recover, like all this kind of stuff is often managers will tell people, hey, we want you to experiment. We want you to innovate. Feel free to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with that is the newcomers, the rookies take that very literally and sometimes they make catastrophic mistakes. But a lot of times the more experienced and perhaps wise contributors say, I don't actually believe you. I don't think you really mean that. One of the most liberating things a leader can do is to let people know, hey, you know what? Here's where it's okay to make mistakes, and here's where it's not okay. These are the parts of the business where you can't really say, "Oh, bummer, dude, that didn't work out so well." Like, back to my Oracle days, like, you bring someone's production database down. Bummer, dude, is not an acceptable response. Versus, hey, we're going to create, a shadow install of the database. And you know what, we're going to try some things there. Like that's a place where you can fail. So sometimes managers feel like they're under pressure to create these risk tolerant environments. I think the best thing you can do for your team is carve out the space. Here's where it's okay. Here's where it's not okay. And be honest about where it's not okay, which is liberating for people to say, oh, okay, there are some other places where we have sandboxes and playgrounds where we can try stuff that might not work and live to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great description of that. You also talk about the difference. Some leaders create a tense environment and multipliers create an intense environment. What's the difference and what do you see when you see leaders doing one or the other?
Yeah, I think we often think of an intense environment as like one where you can't make mistakes. But I think an intense environment is actually one where you feel in control. Like we feel stress when we're not in control. But what we find the best leaders do is they move control to other people. So, they put other people in charge, which is going to create intensity as opposed to tension.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. And it's easy to be accidental about that as well as creating tension, making it tense rather than a positive kind of intense.
Yeah. And I would really encourage people to think about how they put other people in charge. And, one of the mistakes that we make, and it's a trend we've seen over the last number of years, is this trend toward collaboration. And it's really easy when you're in a collaborative environment or a matrixed organization to say, well, everyone's in charge. Like we're all working together. I would equate that to at my house when everyone's in charge of feeding the cat. What happens?
Nobody feeds the cat.
Nobody feeds the cat.
The
We're all
poor
like,
cat.
yeah, no, like I think actually, control gets a bad rap, sort of being the boss in charge sometimes gets a bad rap. I think we have a deep need to know who's in charge. And one of the mistakes we make is we tell people they're in charge, but we don't tell ourselves that we're no longer in charge. And a lot of times we'll say, well, we'll work on this together. Well, when a boss and one of their employees is working on something together, who do you really think the employee thinks is in charge? The boss is in charge. And we're like, no, you're really in charge. We're just collaborating. If you want someone to take charge, you essentially have to hand the pen over to them. Like you hand it to them, say, you're in charge. And for them to really be in charge, you have to let go of the pen because a lot of times, leaders are frustrated that people aren't stepping up and taking ownership and accountability. Well, the reason they're not doing it is probably because you haven't relinquished authority. You haven't said, when it comes to this project, this task, this decision, you get 51% of the vote. Yeah. Put other people in charge and you will get an intense environment. You maintain control and people around you will feel tense.
Ah, that's such a great distinction. Yeah, the proverbial we. I find that there has been such emphasis on a collaborative environment. And so, there is no I in team, that leaders use that word we a lot. And then
Mm,
it's like, we're going to do this. And it's like, well, who's going to do this? Am I, responsible? Am I accountable, or are you? And
yeah.
so those are some really good distinctions you've made. Another discipline is being a challenger versus the diminisher version of that is being a know it all.
Mm,
And I was coaching a CEO and I had her read your book while we worked together. And she really took to heart this idea of being a multiplier. And when I asked her a month after she'd read the book, what was one of her biggest takeaways, it was from the challenger discipline, actually. And instead of trying to have the answers herself, which came really easy for her because she's really bright, she began asking, quote, the big questions, like you talk about in this discipline, of her team members. And she said she'd already seen some tangible results. And so I'd love to hear your take. An example of a leader that you've seen begin asking different questions, and what's the difference in the results they get.
maybe one of my favorite reframings came back when I had just finished the book, and we gave a number of people 30-day challenges. What might you do for 30 days to be more of a multiplier? And there was a woman who was leading someone on her team named Lokesh, and she said, "Okay, here's my task as a leader is to find a way to use him better, because I'm not sure that this guy is actually that smart."
Mm,
And and it was a brave observation to share, but I'm pretty sure we've all worked around someone that we've questioned, like,
mm-hmm,
is this person actually really good at what they do, and are they even bright? And she decided to ask a different question, and the question she asked was not, is Lokesh smart? In what way is he smart?
mm, that's good.
And she said, I just kept asking myself this question for about 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I saw him so differently. And, if you have people on your team that you are struggling to lead or struggling even to like, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
I encourage you to ask this question: in what way is this person smart? And when you ask it with some sincerity, you will see that person's brilliance. And it's a brilliance that they're going to want to share with you.
Mm, great example. Now, is it all or nothing? Are you either a multiplier or a diminisher? Are there examples of leaders who are a multiplier in some ways and not others, or maybe in some contexts but not others?
Well, I sure hope it's not all or nothing, just for my own salvation as a leader. It really isn't. And even of the multipliers that I studied and those I wrote about, very few of them had all five of the multiplier disciplines going. Like, very few were firing on all five of those cylinders. What I found is that those best leaders tended to have three or maybe four of those five. So it's not like you have to be an amazing talent magnet, a liberator, a challenger, a debate maker, an investor, and do none of those diminishing things. You just need to tip the scales
Mm-hmm.
toward the side of the multiplier. In some ways, you don't have to eradicate all of your diminishing tendencies or moments. You just have to create a lot of multiplier moments. And we found that when you lead like a multiplier by rule, you've earned the right to be a diminisher by exception. And I think I learned this best from a group of physician leaders. I was called out to do a seminar for a group of physician leaders at Yale, at the Yale Medical School, and their teaching hospital, Yale New Haven. And so these are all incredibly brilliant physicians who've spent years educating themselves, preparing to not only be physicians, to be to teaching and supervising the work of new physicians in residency programs. And we're doing this multipliers workshop, and it's going great. I actually didn't think it would go very well, and I found, oh, maybe this might be a little bit of a know-it-all group, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's actually going extremely well until we get to lunch. We come back from lunch and the group like has had it. And they're like, you know what, Liz? We love this idea of leaders multiplier. We get it. We want to be debate makers and challengers and ask people good questions and give people space. They're like, but we're not sure you really understand what we do.
Mm.
They say this as if like maybe I've never been in a hospital. I don't understand the concept of surgery. And they're like, we deal with life and death. Like we hold people's hearts in our hands and pump that, like, if someone's flatlining in the OR, like when someone is flatlining in the OR, this is not a multiplier moment. We're
Mm-hmm.
not going to lead a debate or ask a question and, like pull out the genius in the room. Like we're yelling and screaming
Mm-hmm.
in these moments. And I think maybe the mother in me, flashed to, okay, well, what if that were my son or daughter
Mm-hmm.
on that? Like, what would I want them to do? I want them to yell and scream. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want them to throw things if they need to save that life. But fortunately, as they're telling me this, I have this thought come to mind, and I ask them, what percentage of your time do you spend in life or death kind of situations? And they responded with, they thought about it. They kind of conferred a little amongst themselves and they said, probably 3 to 5% of your
Mm.
time. I'm like, okay, great. So for 3 to 5% of your time, I want you to be a know-it-all and tell people what to do and save that life. But what happens when you play out that same way of leading in the other 95 to 97% of your time?
Mm-hmm.
What happens then? And in some ways, you lose the right to yell and scream in those moments that
Mm-hmm.
matter. Like if you've been a multiplier during the times of training, the times of preparation, like you've earned a right maybe in a time of crisis to say, guys, you know what? I just need to call the shots on this one.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? We're 24 hours from launch and we don't have time to reinvent it. Or like, I'm just going to, and you've built the trust on your team that they'll follow you in those moments. And you won't be diminished by maybe a bit of micromanaging here or there. But man, you you need to plant the seeds
Mm.
and the other 95% of the time.
That is such a great distinction that you've made. You said we need to create a lot of multiplier moments by rule, and then we've earned the right to be diminishers by exception.
Mhm.
I just think that's so well spoken around trust. And I know we haven't said that word yet, but clearly that's underneath everything we're talking about. And you've just described what that means to be a leader who truly has built trust. And so then, yeah, we're human. We're going to do the diminisher stuff, or we're going to need to, get really directive at times. But when we've done that moment by moment more often and been that multiplier and entrusting others, we earn that right. And
Yeah. Well, and I in some ways, I am not so secretly on a mission to rid the world of bad bosses. Like I need to be out there and say that. Like that is what I'm about. I'm trying to rid the world of diminishing and accidental diminishing. But with that said, I also in some ways am calling for us to be more forgiving of our leaders.
mm-hmm,
To and if you've built that kind of trust, and I think you nailed it, Christy, with I think it does boil down to the word trust. If you've done that, the people are going to forgive your moments of weakness as a leader, your moments of tyrannical narcissism or whatever it is. But if you do that most of the time, you will receive no forgiveness from your team. And in some ways, not only do I want people to be less of accidental diminishers, part of what I'm also asking people to do is to look at their leaders and realize that some of that diminishing is coming from really good intentions.
mm-hmm,
And, to create healthy organizations where people really can be at their best, sometimes we have to look past people's diminishing actions and look back to their intent. Like, what do they really want? They do want me to take ownership. What do I need to do to help them lead me in a way that allows me to take ownership? But I really do. I think
mm-hmm.
it's about building trust on our teams.
Yeah. And, the podcast is called Leaders Get Real.
Mm,
And so I do appreciate that it's accidental diminishing. And the leaders I work with, they have really good intentions. Me too. I've got good intentions, but I fall short again and again. And I do stuff that, like, why did I do that? And so, it's encouraging to really see that if, through discipline, through commitment, I continue more and more of these multiplier behaviors, then I can be real, and I
yeah.
can be very honest with my team and saying, hey, you know what I did in that last meeting? I screwed up. And, I didn't mean to start taking over with ideas. Can you forgive me on that?
Yeah.
And I think that this whole notion, we're trying to get it right all the time. But I think as we build more and more of these multiplier behaviors, it allows us to be real. And that
Yeah.
may
I
take
don't.
courage as well, but to say, hey, this is where I messed up, or this is where I got in the way. And when we do that, when we're real like that with the people we're leading, that builds even more trust.
Yeah. I don't get it right all the time. I don't get the multiplier stuff right all the time. I think at best, I'm fast to recognize my own diminishing moments. Like, oh, that didn't go as I planned, or oh, that did go exactly as I planned, and I was just not in a good space. But to be able to correct them and, um, you know, I think one of the fastest ways to get real is to talk openly about accidental diminishing. In some ways, the organizations I've seen that go the distance with these ideas, that really get impact, that build this culture of intelligence and talent and capability, are not the organizations that talk a lot about multiplier leadership. They don't obsess over multipliers. They don't put, the posters of the 5 disciplines up on the wall. Please don't do that. They don't do that and put my name on it. But they actually do the opposite. Is they talk a lot about diminishing, and it's not the, oh, can you believe him? He's a huge diminisher. It's they talk. They create an open air conversation about diminishing, which the accidental diminisher concept is the way to do that. And they create it so in the open that someone says, hey, you know what? You're in rescuer mode. I actually don't need a rescue right now. I just want to know you to know what I'm struggling with. Like, you can back off the rescue. Or, hey, Liz, you are in optimist mode. You're killing us with all your sunny, can-do attitude. Like, what we're doing is hard, and we need you as our boss to acknowledge that it's hard. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. I am in optimist mode. Or, um, hey, Liz, we can't keep up with you. You're pace setting right now. And having that conversation out in the open, and I would say even in a way that's fun. I'll share one more thing I found from the research. I- And I think it's because, Chrissy, honestly, I was voted class clown of my high school graduating class. So something I'm not sure I should be ashamed about or actually deeply proud of. But so as I was preparing the survey for this research, I had like 66 items on the survey. And at the last minute, I tossed on sense of humor. I wanted to see how these different kinds of leaders stacked up on sense of humor. I think partially just to vindicate myself and maybe help my mom see that I haven't been like, a complete failure because I think she's still trying to get me to live down the whole class clown thing. And I put it on the survey. And what I found was that sense of humor is the thing that's most negatively correlated with diminishing leaders, meaning they're not funny people. Like they don't, and they don't laugh at themselves. And I think as leaders, we often talk about leaders need to be more vulnerable.
Mhm.
Well, in some ways, I'm not suggesting that you need to like air your dirty laundry, talk about what you're not good at, your weaknesses, and certainly not like your deepest, darkest childhood secrets, like you were voted class clown. Just lighten up and be able to laugh at yourself like, oh, wow, I just hogged up all the airtime. Or, oh, you know what? I realize I haven't let go of the pen. I need to and sort of laugh at yourself. And when you can do that and make light of your own diminishing tendencies, particularly your accidental diminishing tendencies,
Mhm.
it gives your team this space and this safety for them to call you on this, not in like big, scary, like, oh, Christy, we need to talk. Like,
Mhm.
can we talk? I'd like to talk about the ways that I find that you're diminishing me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who wants to have that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people say, "Oh man, Liz, I work for a diminisher. Should I like sit this person down and talk to them about the ways that they're diminishing?" And my answer is never yes, unless I don't like the person. Then I'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's a super good idea. You should definitely do that," because it doesn't go well. But if we can just have a playful way of saying, "Oh, whoa, Christy, you're in idea guy mode." You go, "Oh, I know what Liz means by that. We don't need to have a heart to heart,
Mm-hmm.
a scary feedback confrontation."
Mm. Yeah, and you said that word vulnerability, and it can feel really vulnerable to like reveal my weaknesses, right? Because if I tell you, oh, I know I do this and I'm working on it or anything, like that, what if they start looking for it? What if they start finding it everywhere? And well, the honest truth is they see it anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's fabulous the way you describe, be able to laugh at ourselves and tell those things to our team, say, hey, I do this and I don't mean to, but I do. So will you call me on it when I do that? And then you get that chance to sort of laugh at it and bring it out into the light and then catch it more often when it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bring diminishing into the light allows us to ferret it out, eradicate it, and create more multiplier moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, these have been such great concepts and examples challenging us in our leadership. And my listeners have said from each of my guests, they want to hear something practical. Now, you've been kind of sprinkling some things throughout, actually, but what's something really tangible that listeners can take away and apply immediately?
I am going to give, I think, the most practical, tangible things. The first is what I consider to be the ibuprofen of leadership development, meaning it just treats a lot of symptoms and it's pretty universal as a solution. And that is to ask more questions. And, the best leaders, they tell less and they ask more. And when they ask more questions, they get more from people around them. And you might start this by taking what I call the extreme question challenge, which is simple in concept but pretty hard to do. And that is to lead a conversation, a meeting, a business review, a staff meeting, a one-on-one. Lead it by only asking questions. Now, this is not to say that you should always lead this way, because that's pretty creepy. But the challenge is, pick something. Maybe it's just dinner time at your house. Like your kids don't want to tell you how their day is going. Maybe you just have a dinner where you only ask questions. For me, this emerged back when I was trying to get my kids in bed, and it started out as like, kids, time for bed, leave her alone, put that away, go to get your pajamas on, get a book, not that book, like get in bed, say your prayers, back to bed, and it was just constant barking orders. And I was given this challenge of, why don't you just ask your kids questions? And I actually found that I didn't need to tell them anything. All I needed to do was ask the right questions. But I've also learned that the greatest value I can bring my team is not a directive, but asking an intelligent question. So that, I think, would be the first thing. Maybe the second most practical thing you can do is take the poker chip challenge. Go into a meeting where you might over contribute and say, I am going to give myself, maybe you put 5 poker chips in your pocket, or maybe you put 5 quarters in your pocket and you say, each one of these represents something I'm going to say or contribute. And you dispense your ideas in small but intense doses. And much like this idea we started with, you know when it's time to play big and play a chip, but then you also know when it's time to retreat and restrain yourself a little bit and create space for other people to come in.
Mm.
And then um, maybe one more, I would pick, carve out a space for people to make mistakes in your department, in the group that you lead. Identify the sandboxes, the playgrounds where people can take risks, make mistakes, learn from them, and it's not going to bring the business down. It's not going to take your career down or their career down, and create places where people can truly experiment. Maybe those are three really, really practical things you can do.
Those are great. I'm coaching someone who just did the poker chip challenge in his meetings, and he thought it was a great experiment. And all three of those are great. In fact, I think we need to do a giveaway. Let's do a giveaway. And I'm going to say we're going to give a few books away to listeners who do one of these challenges. We've got the first one is the Extreme Question Challenge. We've got the Poker Chip Challenge. And the third is the Sandbox Challenge, the Let Them Make Mistakes Challenge. So if listeners will respond and share with us what they did and what happened, I'm going to do a drawing and give away a couple of Multiplier books, because those are some good ones for us to put into practice.
Fantastic. I love the idea of people doing something small. And, and we find that, strangely, it's the least ambitious experimenters that do the best here. Because if you go, and if, like, heaven help, if you read the book and decide, I'm going to do all of this, I don't recommend it, because one, you're not likely to do it well, and two, you're likely to freak out your team. And so what I would encourage people to do is just try one small thing they can do to be more, to create more multiplier moments around them.
Mm-hmm. Great. This is all such compelling stuff. What are other ways people, besides reading the book, which is a no-brainer if you don't have it, order it or do one of these challenges and win one of these books? So start with that, of course. But what are other ways people can access tools or further insights to really be on this path as a multiplier?
So there's a couple websites. There's multipliersbooks.com, and it's multipliers and books plural.com, because there's actually a couple Multipliers books. And on that website, we've tried to put a lot of the tools, discussion guides if you want to have a book talk. The accidental diminisher quiz is there, and it's like a 3-minute quiz. And I was, at first I was a little bit reluctant to put together a little quiz, thinking, oh, how helpful can a 3-minute quiz be? We have found so many people have gained like incredible self-awareness just by taking this simple quiz. That's not a bad starting point as well.
Awesome. Well, Liz, this has been fantastic. Your work is so well-founded. The disciplines are so spot on. And these are really the skills. It's an advanced maneuver. And so your book is so insightful in how to really become better at this complex thing called leadership. And it's certainly impacted me. And I know so many others as well. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
It's my pleasure. And Christy, thank you for the work that you're doing, because I think a lot of us collectively are trying to rid the world of bad bosses and create environments where people can show up to work and be brilliant and give 100% of their capability and be stretched and be grown and really get to find that work is actually the place where we experience great joy, not misery. So thank you for helping us do all that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Looking forward to continuing on. Take care. You've been listening to my chat with Liz Wiseman, author of Multipliers. Okay, we've got something immediate we can do. First, she's given us 3 doable challenges. Which one are you going to choose? Number 1, the Extreme Question Challenge. Number 2, the Poker Chip Challenge. Or number 3, the Sandbox Challenge. Just pick one and try it. And we're going to give away some signed copies of Liz's book. All you have to do is try one and share about it by going to leadersgetreal.com and click the button that says, I took the challenge. And second, if you want the book right away and multiply your impact, use our Amazon link at leadersgetreal.com, and your purchase will support orphan kids whom I've just been with in Kenya with Empowering Lives International. Thanks for tuning in today. Please spread the word by sharing this interview with colleagues and subscribe at iTunes, leadersgetreal.com, or your favorite podcast app. And until next time, go forth and get real.